They say small towns are built on trust, neighbors helping neighbors, backyards without fences, smiles that actually mean something. But trust can be a fragile thing. Sometimes. All it takes is one person, one clipboard, one grudge, one thirst for power to turn paradise into a battleground. I moved to Silver Pines chasing peace, not war. I thought I'd found it, with its tree-lined streets and sleepy lake views. I didn't know yet that lurking behind those picket fences was a different kind of danger, not the kind you could see, but the kind that whispered in neighborhood meetings and hid behind fake smiles. And when I finally stood up, when I decided enough was enough. Oh, well, let's just say, sometimes the strongest walls aren't built of brick and mortar, they're built of truth. This is the story of how one community reclaimed itself, one voice at a time. When Mark Carter first drove into Silver Pines, Oregon, it felt like he'd stepped into a postcard. Lush trees lined the winding streets, front porches overflowed with hanging plants, and kids biked lazily down cul-de-sacs without a care in the world. After years of chaos in the city, this was exactly the reset he needed, a place where people smiled, lawns stayed trimmed, and the loudest noise was the occasional barking dog. At first, life was simple. His neighbors waved when he passed by, and he spent weekends fixing up his little blue bungalow, breathing in the crisp lake air. Mark genuinely believed he'd found peace. That illusion shattered the day he met Deborah Collins. Deborah wasn't just the HOA president. She was the self-appointed queen of Silver Pines, tall, trim, and perpetually armed with a leather clipboard. She patrolled the neighborhood like a warden inspecting a prison. Her greetings were sharp nods. Her smiles were warnings. Mark's first violation notice appeared 3 days after moving in mailbox. Paint slightly faded. Immediate correction required. He laughed it off at first, assuming it was a formality, but the notices kept coming. His trash bin was left out too long after pickup. His porch light stayed on past quiet hours. The shade of blue he'd picked for his front door was non-compliant with the approved palette. Each time, the notices grew more aggressive, layered with threats of escalating fines or even further action. Still, Mark tried to stay diplomatic. He repainted the mailbox, timed the trash bins, even considered repainting his door, but it didn't matter, no matter how much he complied. Deborah always found something else to criticize, and the tone of her letters clipped, demanding, almost gleeful in pointing out infractions, made one thing clear. This wasn't about community standards. It was about power. Mark tried to have a civil conversation with her once, catching her as she measured the distance between his rose bushes and the sidewalk. "Morning, Mrs. Collins," he said lightly. "Is there a real problem I can help address?" Deborah didn't even look up. She just scribbled something furiously on her clipboard and muttered, "Compliance is mandatory. No exceptions." That was the moment Mark realized she didn't see neighbors. She saw subjects. Friends warned him quietly. "She's been like this for years," whispered Mrs. Wilkins from across the street. "She fined my son $100 for having a basketball hoop," added Mr. Ortiz, shaking his head. Yet no one fought back. People feared retaliation, extra fines, sudden violation letters. Even rumors spread through the community newsletter. Mark's frustration simmered, but he kept his temper. After all, what was the point of moving to Silver Pines if he lost his peace so easily? What Deborah didn't know, however, was that Mark wasn't as alone as she thought. His younger brother, Kyle Carter, had just been promoted to deputy sheriff of Lake County. Mark hadn't wanted to bring Kyle into neighborhood drama. It felt petty compared to real crimes. Still, he tucked the fact away like a secret weapon, just in case. The final straw came one rainy Tuesday afternoon. Mark found a formal notice taped to his front door, this one accusing him of endangering community safety because a single garden light had allegedly flickered during the night, causing potential distraction to passing vehicles. It was absurd. It was insulting. And at the bottom, in Deborah's elegant, angry handwriting, It threatened potential legal escalation. Mark stood on his porch, rain soaking through his jacket, staring at the letter. It wasn't just about compliance anymore. It was a warning: submit or face consequences. He folded the paper carefully, his jaw set. Fine. If Deborah wanted to play games, she'd soon find she'd challenged the wrong family. And this time, the rules wouldn't be written on her clipboard. Mark didn't strike back immediately. He spent days quietly preparing, treating every new violation letter from Deborah as another brick in the wall. He was building a wall she would eventually crash into head first. Neighbors, sensing a storm brewing, began offering whispers of solidarity. "We're with you," Mrs. Wilkins said one evening, leaving a plate of cookies at his door. "But be careful. She's not above playing dirty." Mark nodded. He already knew. The real escalation came faster than he expected. One evening, returning from a late shift at the hardware store, Mark pulled into his driveway and froze. Two police cruisers idled in front of his house, their headlights slicing through the misty air. Deborah stood smugly by the curb, arms folded, clipboard in hand. The sight alone nearly made Mark laugh. It was so absurd it felt staged. One of the officers, a young deputy Mark didn't recognize, approached warily. "Sir, we received a report of illegal hazardous materials being stored on the premises. We'll need to inspect your garage." Hazardous materials. Mark almost laughed out loud. At worst, he had some lawn fertilizer, a gas can for the mower, and a half-empty can of wood stain. Still, he knew better than to argue on the lawn. Calmly, he invited them inside, unlocking the garage and flipping on the light. The officers looked around: a rake, a few paint cans, some tools neatly arranged. No meth lab, no explosives, nothing even remotely suspicious. One officer shot his partner a look. "Clear," he muttered. Meanwhile, Deborah hovered outside, craning her neck like a nosy neighbor in a bad sitcom. "Is there a problem?" she barked, impatient. "I saw him unloading something suspicious." The younger deputy stepped outside to speak with her. Mark watched from the doorway, arms crossed. His heart pounded, not with fear, but with restrained fury. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was weaponizing law enforcement. That's when headlights cut through the street, another patrol car. But this time, Mark recognized the silhouette stepping out. Deputy Kyle Carter, his brother. Kyle's sharp eyes scanned the scene in a heartbeat. He approached Mark first, lowering his voice. "You good?" Mark nodded. "She called it in. Claimed hazardous materials." Kyle's jaw tightened. He turned slowly, fixing Deborah with a stare so cold it could crack stone. "Ma'am, can you confirm exactly what illegal activity you witnessed?" he asked. Voice clipped. Deborah bristled. "I saw him carrying boxes. He could be hiding anything in there." Kyle arched an eyebrow. "Anything like standard gardening supplies." Deborah's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "Ma'am," Kyle said carefully, "filing a false report wastes police resources. It's a criminal offense." Silence. Neighbors had started to gather, stepping onto their porches or peeking out windows. Phones recorded quietly from across the street. Mark stood tall, saying nothing. Let Kyle do what he did best. Deborah tried to recover, waving her clipboard like a shield. "I'm the HOA president. It's my duty to protect the community." Kyle's voice remained calm, but there was steel beneath it. Protecting the community doesn't include abusing law enforcement to settle personal vendettas. Deborah's face flushed a deep, furious red. Kyle took a half-step closer, lowering his voice enough that only she and Mark could hear. "This is your only warning. Next time you waste police time, you'll answer for it in court." Deborah sputtered, papers trembling in her hand. For the first time, Mark saw fear flash behind her eyes. Kyle turned back to Mark with a tight nod, then addressed the gathering crowd. "Nothing illegal here. Everyone can relax." The deputies packed up, Kyle lingering just long enough to pat his brother's shoulder in silent support. As the cruisers rolled away, Deborah remained rooted on the sidewalk, breathing heavily, humiliated. Mark didn't say a word. He simply locked his door, poured himself a coffee, and sat by the window, watching Deborah stalk back to her house like a beaten queen without a kingdom. He smiled grimly. The trap was sprung. But the real battle, the one where truth would be laid bare for all to see, was just beginning. The night of the emergency HOA meeting. The Silver Pines Community Center buzzed with nervous energy. Rows of folding chairs quickly filled up. Residents who normally avoided HOA drama showed up. Curiosity and quiet outrage written across their faces. At the front of the room sat Deborah Collins, still clinging to her clipboard like a lifeline. She wore her presidential smile, stiff, brittle, and utterly fake. Mark stood near the back, his evidence file tucked neatly under one arm. Next to him, Mrs. Wilkins squeezed his hand briefly, whispering, "It's time." The meeting opened with Deborah's usual theatrics. "Community standards are under threat," she proclaimed. "Our peaceful way of life is at risk." A few polite claps, mostly silence. Then came the moment Mark had been waiting for. The vice president of the HOA, a mild-mannered accountant named Greg, cleared his throat awkwardly. "Before we move forward, Resident Mark Carter has requested time to present concerns. It's pertinent to recent events." Deborah's smile faltered. Mark stepped forward slowly, placing his file on the podium. He looked out over the crowd, familiar faces, wary faces, hopeful faces, and began. He started simply. "I moved here because I believed in community." Then he unveiled the truth, one by one. He held up violation notices Deborah had fabricated, screenshots of text messages where she threatened retaliation, photos showing her trespassing onto private property. Clipboard in hand, a neighbor played video footage of her lurking around at night, snapping unauthorized photos. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Mark finished by reading the official police report signed by Deputy Kyle Carter, documenting Deborah's false hazardous materials complaint. Deborah stood up mid-speech, sputtering. Lies, misinterpretations, but it was too late. Residents began speaking out, emboldened by Mark's calm strength. An elderly man recounted how Deborah fined him for installing a wheelchair ramp without proper aesthetic review. A single mother revealed she was charged for a non-compliant garden that was later proven to match HOA guidelines. Story after story, tales of bullying, humiliation, and threats. Deborah's mask cracked. She shouted over residents, waving her clipboard like a sword, insisting they misunderstood her intentions. That's when the HOA vice president, Greg, stood up, his voice shaking but firm. "Enough." The room stilled. "Deborah," he said, "your actions have endangered this community legally, financially, and emotionally." He glanced around the room. Dozens of heads nodded. "We are voting now." The ballots were simple. Confidence or no confidence. Neighbors lined up, casting votes quickly. Quietly, some with defiant glances toward Deborah. 5 minutes later, the results were announced, unanimous. Deborah Collins was officially removed as HOA president. Effective immediately. Applause exploded. Cheers echoed off the community center walls. Deborah stood frozen, clipboard hanging loosely from her fingers, face drained of color. For the first time, she had no power, no control, no audience. Without a word, she stormed out into the cold night. Mark exhaled, feeling a weight lift off his chest that he hadn't realized was crushing him. Neighbors clapped him on the back, thanked him, hugged him. Silver Pines had taken back its soul, and as Mark left the meeting, walking under the quiet Oregon stars, he knew this wasn't just about winning against one petty tyrant. It was about proving that standing up, even when it's uncomfortable, even when you're afraid, can change everything. The community had been saved, and it would never again let fear wear a crown.